So, hello, we're joined today by Kevin. Can you pronounce your last name for me? I don't want to get it wrong.
Palmieri.
Kevin Palmieri, and we're talking about everything that's got to do with confidence, as always, on the Solvateur podcast. Kevin, when we were talking off camera, one of the first things you mentioned that you think there's no end game to confidence. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I really think of confidence. The analogy I always use, or the example I always use, is a mountain. When you're at the very base of the mountain, you can't really see the peak. What you can see is the next peak. You can see the next highest point. And I think of confidence that way, where for many of us, we have these hard no's. So this is my example. I'm actually getting married next week. Well, technically 2 weeks. And my fiance, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. My fiance said, I want to take a hot air balloon. And I said, hard no, not interested in it. That is reckless. I won't do it. Then I looked up the stats, all things considered, it's pretty safe. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. She said, I want to go parasailing. And I said, that is a no, hard no, I'm not doing it. The reason I say that is because at one point I was too afraid to get on a plane. Then I got the confidence to get on the plane. Now I have the confidence to go in a hot air balloon. Next time we do it, I might be willing to do the parasailing because my confidence is higher. So I think that we look and we assume that I'm not confident. It's the true measure is I am more confident than I used to be. I think that's an important distinction. I don't think there's a line where you go from unconfident to confident. And this is the other thing I'll say too. More often than not, you'll be scrolling through social media and you see a lot of memes that mean well. And one of the memes I see often is nothing grows inside of the comfort zone. Love it. But nobody really tells us how far outside of our comfort zones to get. And that's an important thing because you have your comfort zone, you have your learning zone, and you have your anxiety zone. A lot of people jump from comfort to anxiety to comfort to anxiety when what they really should be doing is trying to find their learning zone. I had a call with somebody recently, and I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, you jumping on a Facebook Live in front of all of your friends, how scary is that for you? She said, that's a 12 out of 10. I said, all right, cool. On a scale of 1 to 10, how scary is it for you to record a video of yourself to yourself and show nobody? She said, that's like a 0. Cool. On a scale of 1 to 10, how scary is it for you to record a video and send it to me? And she said, that's like a 5 out of 10. I said, good, do that. That's perfect. It's not too easy. It's not too hard. It's not going to be something that doesn't stress you at all, but it's not going to be something that makes you super anxious. When it comes to building confidence, I think you have to learn in the living zone. You have to live in the learning zone. And that's where progress is made. That's where growth is made. And I think, to your point, Linus, there is no end game. It's just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more forever.
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. And actually, I wanted to bring in Solis on this because he recently ran a half marathon.
My goodness.
And, it doesn't like it, I know, but
yeah. But I wanted to bring him in because he wouldn't have gone straight for the half marathon distance, right? Where did you start off with that? And how can you relate that to what Kevin's just said there?
So, well, it's a bit of an interesting story, Kevin. So I've been on a placement year. So I was doing the same course as Linus, and then I was out in Cardiff, so sort of Wales, for a placement year working at a law firm. Law's something that I want to go into. But while I was there, I met some great friends, great colleagues, and one of them actually convinced me to do this half marathon. So I said, sure, why not? Let's go for it. I was quite reserved at first, but I said, okay, you've convinced me. Long story short, the weekend before comes around and he misses his flight. So he was back home in Pakistan and he misses his flight and he can't get another flight for a couple of weeks. So I've got to do this half marathon without the bloke that convinced me to do it. So there's just sort of a bit of background. I managed to do it and it was great. But as far as actually taking the step in order to do it, I've said before, it's not, you don't have to do a massive jump as far as something new. I would have been really happy doing a 5K. So I haven't really sort of before this half marathon been into running much. But I don't think I would have done it if I hadn't have almost had that a sort of influence from someone else. But I would have been willing to do a 5K and then scale up, just do bit by bit, you know, as you said, with the sort of scale, I think 5 out of 10 you mentioned, and I'd have been happy to do it. But because I had a bit of outside influence, I gained some confidence. Actually, I almost shared the nerves, I shared the challenge by doing it with someone. obviously, like I said, it didn't work out that way in the end. But as far as actually doing that initial step, I'm more than happy to go outside of my comfort zone and do something by a little bit. But I think if you do it with someone as well, I think then that can help with the confidence.
I have a
I don't know
very
if that's the answer you were looking for,
a
Linus,
very good story that is aligned with that, Alex. Okay. I was trying, my main focus at this point in my life, I think I was probably 26, was to get outside of my comfort zone. I had a buddy who called me one day and I was at work and he said, "Hey, I know you're trying to get out of your comfort zone. And I know you said you would come to England with me next time I go. I'm going to England. Flights are half priced. You have to come. If you want to get outside of your comfort zone, this is how to do it." And I was like, okay, well, money is not a problem because I'm making good money. Okay. That's not an excuse. All right, I'll do this. So this is the second time I'd ever flown. And when I got on this plane, I was like, wait, this is the plane? This thing's massive. It's got like 20 rows of seats. This is wild. This thing can't fly. It's a whole thing. So we end up flying there. Awesome. No big deal. The day we landed was actually, there was a bus bombing or a train bombing that day when we landed. And I was like, okay, I don't like that. That's a little sketchy, but everything went off without a hitch. We spent like a week there. So it was 2 or 3 days before we were supposed to fly home. And I said to my buddy, I said, "I'm so excited to get home. What are you going to do Saturday when we get home?" And he said, "We're not getting home till Sunday." And I said, no, we're going Saturday. I have my ticket right here. And he said, "Oh no, I booked my flight for Sunday." And I said, "No way did you do that?" He's like, "Yeah, man." I was like, "I'm gonna have to fly back myself." And he's like, "Yeah, unless you want to get another ticket. Yeah, you're gonna have to." So I remember that night, the night that I was going the next day, I was sleeping on this mattress at his cousin's flat and the air was seeping out of it. And I could not sleep to save my life because I had to wake up. I had to navigate to the tube to Heathrow, which I didn't know how to do. I'm walking down the streets of London at like 4 a.m. And that was one of the hardest things ever for me. But I was more comfortable because I had somebody do it with me the first time. So to your point, I would have lived there if I had to. That's how afraid I was. But I ended up doing it because I had somebody who showed me the way initially. And I think that speaks to your point as well, Alex.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Yeah, having that like mind, having that someone that, near you that has sort of done it before or kind of understands what they're doing is always nice to kind of guide you along the way, which is sort of the point of this podcast as well, because when people hear the stories that you have, Kevin, and the other guests we have on, the impossible seems slightly more possible, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of actually a train story that I had was, so when I think I was 18, I traveled from a very remote place in Italy called Selva, all the way to Nice, France by train. So it's like, I think I went through 2 countries actually, all different languages. It was completely awful. I had no idea what I was doing. I was hungover. It was terrible. But then I eventually got there. I called it off, and my dad was waiting at the kind of train station, actually quite surprised that I actually made it. But fast forward a couple of years down the line, I was seeing this young man, Alex, in Exeter, on a night out, and I just decided I didn't want to stay the night, so I decided to catch the night train. I don't know if any of the listeners have been on a night train at 4 a.m, 3 a.m, waiting outside a station that's not even open yet. But it doesn't matter where you are; it's really not a pleasant place to be. You got people throwing things at you. It's really awful. And I got on the train, and there was this guy going all the way down to Cornwall from Reading, which is like 4 or 5 hour journey. And he was nervous the whole time because he didn't know where he was going. And I was explaining it to him that I was at uni at Cornwall and that he could get here and here. And immediately he calmed down, because it's like immediately you've seen someone or you've met someone that's done what you think is hard or difficult. And you immediately get calmed down because you think, well, he's done it, so I can definitely do it. Right. So I think that's an important point you've touched on there.
I try to do the same thing when I'm flying. I hate flying. I'm not a fan of flying, if you can't tell from my stories. And 2 things I try to do. One, I try to pretend there's somebody next to me who's more afraid than I am. And I pretend I'm giving them advice. And this actually came in very handy because myself, my business partner, and his girlfriend and her business partner, we went to Florida. And it's probably like a 3-hour flight from where I live. And on the ride home, it was like unreasonably turbulent. And I'm very good friends with Alan's girlfriend's business partner. Her name is Bianca. And she was sitting next to me. And she literally grabbed my arm. And she's like a strong woman. Like, she's super strong. And she grabbed my arm and was squeezing it so hard. And I was like, B, we're fine. Like, we're fine. Even though internally I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God, this is brutal. But I knew I had to hold it together for her, which actually made me more confident. So yeah, Linus, to your point, same thing.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I just want to give a quick segue because we're a bit of the way in now. What is it actually you do? Explain to our audience. So you made a leap from, you didn't want to go to college, and now you're here at a podcast that is very, very successful. You've got a career out of it. So how did that happen? What confidence did it require for you to make that step?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I don't know if I was operating on confidence in the beginning. I think I was just operating on being miserable. So all my friends went to college after high school, and I knew I didn't want to go to college because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I was working at a gas station. I cleaned bathrooms at a hospital. I was a truck driver. I was a forklift operator. I was a personal trainer. I was on call for the fire department for a very short time. But I ended up getting this unique job opportunity in the weatherization field. So we would go into schools and anything state owned, and we would make the buildings more energy efficient. That's what we did. And that was a huge step for me, because the first time I met my boss, my quote unquote interview, I went to him and I basically just like was talking and trying to sell him on who I was as a human being. And he said, yeah, you're going to do fine here. We're actually going to send you out soon because you have a great personality and you'll fit in with everybody working here. And I said, okay, cool. That's awesome. He called me a couple of weeks later and said, okay, our first job is in Delaware, which from where I lived was 8 hours. And he said, are you good to go this week? And I was like, yeah, I guess. He's like, just pack a suitcase. I'll bring you down there and you're going to live there for a couple of weeks. We're going to train you and then you'll get to work. And I was like, okay. So I proceeded to get into a vehicle with a man who I'd met one time, drive 8 hours, live in a house with 7 other people who I'd never met, and then proceed to learn how to do a job I'd never done before, all while making $50 an hour, which I didn't understand how I was making. It was this weird time in my life. But that was one of those pivotal times where it taught me a lot about myself. I think when your back's up against the wall and you're really, really afraid, how you react, you remember. And for me, that was like a very important part of my life. So if you fast forward a few years, I was quote unquote very successful. I had a high paying job. Like I just mentioned, my girlfriend was a model. I had a sports car. I had the body of my dreams. I had just done a bodybuilding show, but I was pretty miserable. I looked really successful. I looked like a badass, but I wasn't. I didn't feel like one. My girlfriend ended up leaving me because I was like just super depressed and super anxious. And when she left, I got into self-improvement because I realized that anytime a relationship had failed, I was probably at least 50% of why it failed. So I wanted to work on myself. So I would say these positive affirmations every night before I went to bed. And these helped me with my confidence for sure. I am talented. I am handsome. I am worthy. I am intelligent. And this year I will make the most money I've ever made in my entire life. And I really leaned on that last one. So that next year started. I ended up getting a promotion to a foreman of my company. And then the next 10 months out of that year, I was on the road every single week. So I was on the road for 10 months out of those 12 months. I would pack my suitcase, head out. When I got home, I would take my suitcase, pour it into the washer, take it out, put it in the dryer, and then take it straight from the dryer back into my suitcase. And then boom, I was off again. And it was a grind, but I wanted to make money. That's all I wanted to do. So I was willing to do whatever it took to make that money. We get to the end of that year. Like I said, I'd been on the road for 10 months. I opened my final pay stub and I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree, and nothing changed.
Wow.
I was still miserable. I was still not confident. I still didn't know what I wanted out of life. And shortly thereafter, I was interviewed on a podcast. And then I started my own podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. I realized most of my life I'd been living unconsciously, just kind of gliding through life. What's the opposite of unconscious? Hyperconscious. I thought it was a good title. I'm going to roll with this. So that was the beginning. I started this podcast. I was interviewing people about confidence, mindset, what they wanted to do with their life. But it's very hard to be a consistent podcaster while you're out living in hotels working. And it kept getting worse. Like I knew I couldn't podcast and do this job, but I didn't have the courage to leave. And my friendships were definitely getting strained. I didn't have a relationship because I didn't have time. So that didn't work. And it got to the point where I was in New Jersey, which was like 6 hours from where I lived. And my alarm went off at 5:15. I sat up, slid to the edge of the bed, lacing up my work boots. And the best way to explain it is there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And one was saying, you're stuck here forever. You're never going to make this kind of money again. If you do leave, what will your friends think? If you do leave, what will your family think? And if you do leave, do you really think you can become a successful podcaster? And I didn't. I genuinely didn't know how that was possible. So in that moment, I felt like if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. And that's just where I was at that point. I was in this dark hole of despair. I texted my business partner, who was just my friend at the time, and he said, Kev, I think you need to change your environment. I really do. You've learned so much. Your awareness is so much higher. It's time for a change. So 3 or 4 months later, I left my job, and then I went full time into what we're doing today. And the first 3 years, I told you, Linus, behind the scenes, the first 3 years I was broke. I was $35,000 in credit card debt. I couldn't afford Christmas presents for my girlfriend 2 years in a row. I couldn't pay rent. My car broke down. I had a hole in the engine and I couldn't get it fixed. My brakes were done. I couldn't get those fixed. So it didn't go from me leaving my job to where we are today. It went from me leaving my job and completely starting over, and then eventually getting to where we are today. And that, I mean, every step is taking confidence. It took me 150 podcast episodes to really feel confident as a podcaster. And then when I started speaking, that was a whole nother thing that I didn't think I could do. And then when I started getting on other podcasts, that was a whole nother thing, and coaching. Yeah. So really every step of the way, my limiting beliefs of you're not good enough have always been there. It's just how long do I let them run? And then how fast do I give them a little throat judo chop and say, yo, get out of here. I got to go do this. So it depends.
100%. No, it's really interesting. I'm going to pass over Solers because I know he's got a burning question, because every time he's got a burning question, he goes, yeah. But before I just want to say that all those listening are really going to resonate with that. And it's what I did say to you off camera. I know you're listening, those entrepreneurs that have ideas bouncing around in the middle of the night. I'm going to say it very simply, after what Kevin's just said, what the fuck are you waiting for? Seriously, you are worth it, and you can do it. Solers.
I completely agree with you there, Linus. Yeah. What I was going to say, so Kevin, what kept you going? So I know you were saying about, judo chopping the thoughts of doubt or sort of self-criticism, that kind of thing. But what actually kept you going after a year of doing the podcast? What sort of fueled that fire?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is my business partner. I already like you guys like more than most podcasters, not just as human beings, but your ability to win, because there's two of you. The level of accountability you have is unreasonable, and you'll never know because you don't know what it's like not to have it. But make sure you double and triple down on that, because that's very, very valuable. So that's one thing, is I have an amazing business partner who has been very supportive and genuinely mentoring me since the beginning. The other part is Alan's my business partner. We were both raised without fathers. So I didn't meet my dad until I was 27. His dad passed away when he was 2 in a car accident. And we really believe that a lot of the traumas and a lot of the pains that we went through as children could have been solved or avoided completely if self-improvement was in our lives and our families' lives. So it wasn't a job. It wasn't like, I'm going to quit my job and then do this thing and make money. That was never the focus. It was very much, and I know this is cliche, but it was very much, I'm going to quit my job and we're going to go change the world. And I know a lot of people say that, but I've sacrificed so much for this, and I will continue to sacrifice. I have very few things that are non-negotiables. My fiance is one, other than that, like, I'm pretty much willing to do whatever it takes. I've almost died for this several times. So it's the fact that I really want to change the world, because I don't want to see people go through what I've gone through. And I think that we can. I think with Alan and I, we can do it. So I'll say this. It's a non-negotiable for me to stop. That's the best way to explain it.
You said you don't want to see other people go through what you've gone through. And this is going to sound really controversial. But I want to ask you the question, why?
I don't think, and again, this isn't a judgment against other humans, but I don't know that anybody else would have survived. I have I'm pretty good at suffering. Whatever reason, like I'm pretty good at suffering. I was never the best or the smartest, but I could endure more pain than most people. You know, my cousin beat me over the head with a wiffle ball bat. He threw me into a thorn bush, and he used to hit me over the head with metal folding chairs, like real metal folding chairs. And I kind of liked it because I wanted to be a professional wrestler. So like my ability to suffer and take pain is pretty high. And I have a tattoo that says never quit. So it's like, that's kind of my identity. I don't know that I think that would have broken other people worse than it broke me. I really do.
Yeah, that is sort of the answer I was fishing for, to be perfect. I mean, you mentioned you're a personal trainer at one point, and this has been something that has been in the back of my head going back and forth a lot of the time, is this idea of body confidence. We haven't had a personal trainer on yet. It's been someone that's on my list for sure. I just want to talk a bit about body positivity. Both Solas and I in the last year have gone through a massive fitness journey for different reasons. Solas was the marathon, myself was a amateur boxing match. I just want to get your opinion on body positivity and where you think the world's going on that.
Oh man, it's such a challenging time. This is what I've said. I've said this so many times before. If you wanted to see somebody that was in world-class shape like 30 years ago, you either saw them on the TV or you saw them in a magazine, and it seemed like they were the best in the world. So I don't think it affected you as much. Now it's like, I'm in really good shape, but nothing compared to anybody I see on Instagram. Like, I don't look anything like them. You know, I have abs and I'm strong, but not like that. So I think what it's really done is it has created, the way social media is set up is to make sure that the people who are the quote unquote best get the most traction. And we're looking at people who like are anomalies in the world. We're talking like some of the strongest, best looking humans on the planet. And we're comparing to that. I think that's the biggest issue, is we're not comparing to where we used to be or where we want to go. We're comparing to where other people are. That's the biggest thing I've seen. And here's how I believe I know that that's true. Even when we get in better shape, if we're still comparing to that, we're not going to feel good. You have to look at yourself.
I think, yeah, I can agree with you. I mean, for me, Solas will attest to this. I'm a person of excess, so it's never enough. No matter whatever you do is never enough. Because quite often, let's be honest, it's not. You record 10 episodes a week, you could record 12. Like, come on. You know, it is never enough. And if you have that idea in your mind, yes, it can be perceived as being slightly self-destructive occasionally, but it drives you to that next level. It pushes you to that next level. And I was also hazard the guess that all those people that are on social media, that are the perfection as society sees them, they have that exact thing in their mind. It's never enough. And that's why they're in those positions. But I also want to come on the point of view, there's been a lot of controversy about runway models, and now they're having plus size models, and maybe skinny models are really bad to have on, and we should be focusing on more natural body people, which is exactly what you're saying. I want to get your opinion on that. Because I think it is important, because I know a lot of people that don't have body confidence that maybe should.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sustainable realism. And all I mean by that is, I'll use myself as an example. I am 5'4". I'm never going to look like The Rock. Just not going to happen. It's not in me. So if I was to go to the store and every mannequin was 6'4" and 275 pounds, I would probably feel pretty crappy, honestly. So I think that we're moving in a direction where we understand. I think it used to be this: the way to sell to human beings is make sure everybody wearing our stuff is like perfect. And I think for a while that probably worked. And I think now it's almost like, well, I can't see myself wearing that because that's not what I look like. So I think it's a really, really, really positive thing. And I think it's long overdue, honestly, because that you can only do that for so long. And this is the other thing too, Linus. People are actually finally having their voices heard. That's the other thing. Like, you can call out Victoria's Secret on Instagram. And if enough people do it, they have to listen. That's another thing where before, what are you going to email them or call them? We're in a different time now where your opinions can be seen, heard, and can actually have impact. So I think it's very important, because if you don't feel like, number one, that is realistic for you, whether it is or not, that's a completely separate thing. But then you don't feel like you're included. And if you don't feel included, you don't feel like you belong. And if you don't feel like you belong, you're living a very dangerous line, because that's human beings require belonging.
Yeah, they do. That's 100%. Yeah, it dates back to the earliest periods of our biology. We need to feel like we belong to a cause. We need to feel like we belong to a tribe. We need to feel like there are people around us that are like us, that like us, that are invested in us. It is how it works. I mean, Solas, when you got into absolutely fantastic shape for your marathon, how do you feel on this issue?
I wouldn't say fantastic shape by any means, once again. And talking about the sort of body positivity. So I think you've got two very dangerous sort of body types. You've got unhealthy sort of skinny and unhealthy sort of overweight. And I agree with what you were saying, Kevin. Look at what's right for you. And it's almost about balance as well. And it's about not going one way or the other, just sort of finding a happy medium. And I think the more that the companies do cater for a wider range, it's great, because there's all of these in-betweens, as opposed to the two different ends of the spectrum. As far as, I know it was quite convoluted, as far as getting back to what you were saying, Linus, about how I got in shape, for me it's a necessity. I'm doing this half marathon whether or not I like it, and the better shape I get in and all of the preparation I do before, the far easier doing the half marathon is going to actually be. So I thought to myself, I say suffer, I'll go on a jog, I'll do a run, I'll eat a bit more healthily, and I'll do that before the half marathon, so that when it actually comes around, I am more prepared, and tying back, I'm more confident for it, because I've put in that work. So, so that's my sort of stance. But yeah, I think a lot of people almost sort of feel entitled in some way, and sort of that confidence doesn't really sort of kick in, because they think, they sort of think, I almost deserve to sort of have that place without putting in that hard work. So I think if a way of sort of reinforcing that confidence is to realize yourself that you've worked for it, then you could think, I'm in this position that other people haven't. But I know that you had a similar sort of experience with your boxing, because you obviously put in a lot of hard work for that.
Well, yeah, but before I go into that, I was just going to ask Kevin, have you, just out of interest, have you always been a really fit human being, or have there been times in your life where you were up and down? Maybe have there been times in your life where you're overweight or underweight?
I'm blessed because I've kind of always been in shape. I have really good genetics. That's definitely something. Like, I was accused of being on steroids in high school by like other baseball teams, which was interesting for me. It was like, oh, that's wild. I'm very blessed because I've always been in shape, but also I work really, really, really hard. Alan and I did a challenge where I lost 10 pounds in the last 9 weeks. And one of the ways, Linus, is I do kickboxing every day, an hour. Yeah. I do 10 5-minute rounds. Like, that's not easy. That is not easy.
That is not easy.
Right?
Oh,
But again, I think the other thing too, that I just want to touch on really quickly, is most of your results are directly in alignment with your standards, but some results aren't realistic. That's so important. Is like, we do 7 episodes a week and we have a 16-person team and so many things going on. What we have is honestly not possible for some people. I think that's just important. Now, I'm not saying don't chase your dreams and try, but the advice I always give people is you shouldn't necessarily want what I want, because there are odds that, or there are chances that you're not meant to do what I'm doing. Now, could I play in the NBA if I tried really hard for the rest of my life? Maybe. Maybe. Could I be a more successful podcaster than basketball player? Absolutely, 100%, no questions asked. So that's an important thing that I always try to say is, I want you to try everything and I want you to try to be the best at everything. But there is something that you're meant to be the best at, and it might not be what you think it is.
That's interesting you say that, actually. That's an exact echo of, so with the boxing, I have a condition. I don't know if the listeners know about this. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I have a condition called tyrosine type 3, which means I have to eat a certain amount of protein a day. I can't eat more than that. The long-term effects of me eating too much protein would be mental problems. Sometimes even in some types of the condition can result in death. So it obviously is very difficult for me to build muscle, etc., because I'm on that restricted diet. And with the boxing, I raised money for Great Ormond Street Hospital, which was the hospital I was treated at as a child. And part of that was I was going to get included in that brochure with my final product of this 3 months of training. And at the end of it, someone very close to me said, you can't put yourself in that brochure, Linus. And I dropped down from 78 to 64 kg in a period of 2.5 months. And they said, you can't put yourself in that brochure. And I said, why? And she said to me, well, because they don't actually know how you did that. And at first I was a bit confused, because obviously I'd worked hard. I was skipping for 30 minutes every day straight. You know, I was working out the gym, then going to training in the evening. It was mental, diet was perfect. Everything was perfect. But she said also, you know, you're having a cigarette in the morning, so you wouldn't get hungry until 2 o'clock. You were doing things that were actually unhealthy. So putting that in a brochure to say to other people, you can get like this, is actually not necessarily true, because the amount of stuff I sacrificed is maybe something that other people would not be willing to sacrifice and not be willing to do. So I think it is important when people who have achieved or have done something interesting or are maybe on the road to do something are very careful with the advice they give. Because sometimes if you just, like exactly what you're saying with the Instagram, with the TikTok, with everything, if you just put the finished product on there and you don't actually explain the journey with that, people might not understand it. And I do relate to people that look at these guys with 6-packs, because I mean, I got a 6-pack eventually, but it took, I'm not even joking, I couldn't eat anything. I had to work on my abs every day. It was an absolute pain. But, you know, at one point in my life, I had body dysmorphia and stuff like that. It is dangerous if you just put the finished product out there, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree. I try to always be as honest as humanly possible. It's like, I don't think most people should do what we're doing. I was on a podcast earlier. I was on a call earlier, and I was like, yeah, I'm going away for 10 days. That'll be the first time I've taken off in 5 years. And I'm still going to work. I'll work somehow. It's not going to be like, I'm not going to be doing interviews, but I'll still be tracking the finances and I'll be doing stuff every day. Like, I haven't had a day off in 5 years. And I think I always say to people, like, if you want what we want, that's fine. I want you to have it if you want it, but at least understand. So we talk about goal setting a lot, and I love that. Awesome. But there's a difference between having the awareness to set a goal and having the awareness to understand what it will take to achieve a goal. And I think that's an important thing, is like, are you actually willing to achieve the goal? That's a fine line, and it's going to require things that you might not expect. So that's why I always try to give people an understanding. I had somebody say to me one time, they said, I want to be just like you and do what you're doing. And I said, okay. They said, I actually want to be like Gary V. And I was like, well, I'm not Gary V, so I don't know what that's going to be like. I don't know what that'll take. But I said, I can assume what it would take. Do you want to be home to walk your kids to the bus every day? And he said, absolutely, non-negotiable. I said, okay. Do you want to be home for dinner every night? He said, yeah, absolutely. I said, okay. Do you want to be famous? He's like, no, not really. And I said, do you really want to be Gary V, or do you just think it would be cool to be? And we got to the point where he was like, I don't want to do all that. I don't want to trade in my life for the next 30 years to be that. And he changed his path based on that. But it's interesting. You can set goals, you can set huge goals, but understand that setting the goal is the easiest part. The rest of it with you showing up every day, that's the real challenge. And you got to ask yourself, do I actually want what I say I want?
Yeah. How do you stop people focusing on the success? So like with that story, for example, so I assume when a lot of people say they're really interested in what it is you do with the podcast, I really want to be like you. How do you change that mentality? How do you make them think, well, this is a long way away, but these are some ways to start?
I just try to tell them the truth. I say like, okay, are you good to go for the next 5 years before you see any results? It's kind of that of, I don't want to say I test them, but I kind of do in a way of like, my goal is to raise your awareness for you to question whether or not you actually want to do this. So it's one of those things of, it's through the power of story and vulnerability. I don't want anybody to not be able to pay rent unless that's what you really want. But like, when I tell people this journey has taken parts of me I will never get back, I'm not kidding. That's not me just saying that to sound cool. Like, I have had just brutal anxiety and depression over the course of this journey. So I try to tell people the truth. And then I try to figure out, like, what do you actually want? Do you want the significance that comes with being me, being on other podcasts? Like, that's awesome. I love that. I feel so valued. Awesome. Are you looking to build a community like we have? Okay, there's other ways to do that. So I think it's one of those things of understanding that most people don't actually want the result. They want what the result feels like, or what the result looks like, or what the result will bring. And there's oftentimes other ways you can get what the result will bring. So that's usually what it is, Alex. I try to raise their awareness to the level that I can. I can't, I'm not Gary Vee by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know what that's like. I assume it's way more challenging than what my life's like.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things. It's like, if you were to ask me why we do this podcast, the answer would never be to become famous or to make money from it. That is, anyone that knows me knows that I love working. I love the grind. I love waking up every morning knowing I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do it. Because I can think of nothing more painful than sitting in bed in the morning and actually having to come up with things to do. I want to wake up in the morning, my day's already planned for me. I've already got all this to do. And if I don't do that, that's the consequence. I've got to do that, now. And I think if people fall in love too much with the end goal, they don't fall in love with the process. Struggling, I hate to say it, and I know there's different levels of struggling. Of course, I'm not an idiot. I'm not Molly May saying we all have the same 24 hours in the day. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying struggling is a part of life. Struggling creates stronger people. You learn quickly. It's just that feeling of living, that you're on the edge the whole time, that you have to do certain things right and you have to do certain things wrong so you can learn. And I think if you fall in love with the process rather than goal, you will tend to be a bit more successful than the people that fall in love with the goal.
If you look at some of the best athletes in the world, they have trouble retiring.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why. One of the tells for me, especially with podcasters, is they say, I'm only getting into this so I can get out of it. Like, good luck. Like, I'm only getting in. I want 100,000 downloads and then I'll be done. It's like, why start? Why? What do you mean? That's not, it's like saying I want to get to the 5-year anniversary of my marriage and that'll be good. Aren't you in the relationship forever? Isn't that the point? Somebody said that the other day. They said, have you been married before? I said, this is my first and only. My first and only. We're going to make this work. That's why we're doing it. So to your point, Linus, go ahead. You
don't know if that's actually going to be the case. But if you don't go into it thinking that, then what are you doing, man?
I'm gonna do everything I can.
Exactly.
Do I know we're gonna be the most successful podcast in the self-improvement industry? No, but I'm gonna do everything I can to get us there. Alan's doing everything he can. Like, that's all you can do. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, Solas and I, Solas is going into his 3rd year at uni next year. And he's going to be very busy as a 3rd-year law student, I'll tell you, mate. I'm going to work abroad in Milan. But, we're still going to keep this up, even if we divide it into seasons, which I don't know why other podcasts don't do that. If they've got other things going on, especially if you've got, like, it's not your only thing you're doing. I don't know why you don't divide into seasons. It's a great thing to do. But yeah, I think we've really enjoyed talking to people that have been on, not only have been on this earth longer than us, but actually have had a great deal more experiences than us. Because we don't have many listeners, but we know we've had messages from listeners saying this person's great, that person's great, I heard this, and that's where the real reward is.
I think it is about perspective, so as opposed to just looking at the end goal, it's also looking at the short-term benefits. So like Linus, you just said about people messaging and saying that they find listening to us really rewarding. I wouldn't have thought that a few months ago, someone listening to me for in a million years, or chatting to a variety of interesting people from all sorts of different careers. I find that rewarding. And so looking at what we can get in the short term, it doesn't really matter what happens in the long term. I'm enjoying the journey, and Linus, I assume you are too, or I know you are too.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, and that's interesting you say that, Kevin. I've got one more question before I hand over to Solas for the final question and the outro. It's one I asked a guest we actually just recorded with an hour ago, but it's something that I don't know why I haven't been asking guests before. Confidence links in a lot with your fears, because sometimes you're not confident because you fear something happening. What is your biggest fear that you've ever had in your life? Something that cripples you and cripples your confidence, triggers your anxiety, and have you dealt with it, or how are you putting in the steps to deal with it?
Failure. Nothing's close. Failing in front of people is like my biggest, and this is going to maybe seem cliche. I have failed more in the last 5 years than I have ever. I mean, I fail in every single episode. There is points like when I listen back to this, it'll be like, I should have told my story better. Not that I'm beating myself up, but it's like, that's a mistake. I made a mistake. I could do better. So failure, bar none. I am terrified of failure. I just am. And I just try to keep showing up. And one thing that's really helped me is I disassociated. So failure, I'll just say this, outcome and self-worth. Your outcome, if it hurts you when you fail, you're relying too much on the outcome for your self-worth. That's what happened to me, is if I don't do well, I am not good. And I switched that. Now it's like, if I don't do well, I can do better next time. And honestly, I'm way better than I've ever been. And that was an interesting, important thing for me, where a failure is just today. Like, I'll get more reps tomorrow. I get more shots tomorrow. I'll be up to the plate tomorrow, and I'll use my failures from today. I'll use my losses from today as lessons for tomorrow. That's been the biggest thing for me, is understanding that, number one, failing creates progress. Failing can be quite empowering, and it's not failure unless you stop. I mean, you're just getting better. It just doesn't seem like it.
This is going to be a podcast first before you close out, Solas. I'm going to give you, it's not advice. Yeah, fuck it. It's advice. It's something that I've noticed a lot. And I've talked to Solas about this. It's relevant to my degree. It's relevant to my boxing match. It's relevant to my fitness journey. It's relevant to the book. It's relevant to my stage career and everything that I do. It's this idea that you're doing something that you will most likely fail at, but there's a payoff if you succeed. And I always compare it to walking out of a bank with a bag of money and no one's noticed that you've just taken the money out of the bank. It's because if you pull it off, and you pull something off that you think you couldn't pull off, and that you were telling everyone around you, oh yeah, I'll pull it off, it'll be fine, don't worry, mate. And you actually do pull it off, the rewards are just insane. So you should fear failure 100%, but you should embrace the success when you think you were going to fail, because then you start getting more used to the idea of failure, because it doesn't become a fear, it almost becomes a driver. So yeah, that would be my last piece. But yeah, I'll pass you on to Solas, who'll ask you maybe one last question and wrap it up.
What's a good way to wrap it up? I'm trying to think of a very good question here for you, Kevin.
No pressure.
What do you most look forward to, sort of in life? So I know you've got the podcast. I know you're getting married once again. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But what really does make you happy, and what sort of do you enjoy and gives you that drive? I know we said once again about the podcast, but yeah.
We have a Facebook group, and I did a podcast, or it was kind of like we call it NLU interview. So like NLYOU, and we interview people from the community. And I interviewed somebody today, and she messaged me after, and she said, "You have no idea how much that meant to me." That it's like the fact that I can have impact on somebody's life, some kid with a dream, that what you guys are talking about. Like you're so early, but still, like when you get those messages, Alan has this practice where he screenshots all of the messages we've ever gotten, and it's hundreds, thousands, whatever. And he calls it his deepest why folder. Do that. That's what it's all about. Now, I am very money driven. So I had this conversation with my fiance recently. We were talking about, we pulled a deck of cards, and it had a bunch of deep questions. And it said, what is something you're looking forward to having nostalgia about? And I said, being broke. Like when I can look back and say, like, remember when we used to have to worry about money? That's a big thing for me. I've worried about money since I was 14, younger than that, probably. I don't want to have to do that anymore. And mostly because I know I can help more people when I have money. One of my goals is to buy somebody's Christmas list, or like buy somebody's Thanksgiving. That is what I'm playing for. I cannot wait to do that. So yeah, those are a couple of things. It's the impact first, but money is definitely important to me. But not just so what I can do with it. It's the certainty that it brings, and then what I can give back. That's definitely a big thing for me.
Yeah. No, I respect that. I like that answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think now's a sort of good time to bring this podcast to an end. But Kevin, once again, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a great pleasure.
I appreciate you guys so much. This is truly wonderful. I'll come back on anytime, whenever you want.
Thank you so much.
What are you up to tomorrow?
I'm working. Believe it or not, I'm working. So, send me a link.
Yeah. But no, thank you. And Linus, thank you as well. But thank you everyone listening, and remember to like, subscribe, and give us a follow on all of our platforms that will be in the description. Cheers.
Love that deep bass, love that sound. Top floor with me, whipped and bound. Models that's heaven finally found. Bass reverberating through the ground. Drink in my hand, yeah, I'm a raver. Got the floor, yeah, the racks, yeah, and the paper. Yeah, DJ calling, Mr. Savior. Yeah, girls on the pool, but I did that later. Drink in my hand, yeah, I'm a raver.